Welcome back, TLCers. Thanks for joining us today. We have another great conversation. Today we're going to talk about non-standard testing, testing outside the box. We have four great panelists, Anthony, Gary, Jason, and Chad. But before we start, we have a couple of announcements and notes. Number one, we have a YouTube channel. Yay! So panelists, please go share the video recordings of sessions that you've been in the past. Everybody go subscribe, share widely. It's took a lot of work to get all of that up there. I'm in the process. I'm about 3/4 of the way through of putting actual notes in the description. So kind of the TLDR type stuff with some links whenever we discuss particular content or whatever. So feel free, go engage, read. If there's specific asks that you have, if you watch a video and you want a particular link that I haven't got in there, reach out, happy to do it. Second, we got more stickers. The first stickers we got went really, really fast. So there's these two links. The first takes you to the YouTube channel. The second takes you to a request form to get your own stickers. And then you too can have your own customized TLC bottle or computer or phone or whatever. So let me know if you want stickers. Happy to help. Number 3, TLC happy hours are currently being planned. The first one will be at the CXL Live conference in March in Austin. Second one is being planned for the DA Hub, more to come, but and there might be some others in there, so stay tuned for that. When we were putting the YouTube channel or the video recordings up on YouTube, one of the sessions that we watched through to grab notes was the use cases and optimization, where we asked several of you TLC members to share an example test that you'd run and maybe some big insight takeaway or maybe a big failure or some kind of pitfall. And it was really popular. You guys really liked it. And you asked for us to do it again. So now's the chance. We're going to do it again. All you got to do is send me an email, a Slack message. You can chat me here. It doesn't matter. Just let me know that you're interested. And then once I get enough people, we'll figure out the timing and when we're going to do that. Second, our next conversation, we have 2 conversations coming, one in March and one in April. One will be about SEO and the impact that it can have on CRO and vice versa, and it should be a pretty interesting conversation. I currently have 1 panelist. I'm looking for more. We'll go with 1 if we can't get more, but if anybody knows anybody in that space who would be interested in joining the conversation, let me know, or if any of you are interested, reach out. And then we need future topic suggestions. So use the Zoom chat, TLC Slack, email me, whatever. Just start sending your suggestions on topics you'd like to have, and if yourself or other panelists that would be good for those topics. That's everything. Okay, thanks everybody. So now let's do our introductions. I guess we'll start with Gary. So Gary is this guy who, he's kind of been doing this for a while. What is it that you do, Gary? He's like, wait, really?
These days?
Yeah, what is it that you do? No, he's amazing. If you don't know Gary, you probably haven't been in the industry very long.
So we do analytics on shopper journeys primarily in stores.
Awesome. He's basically bringing the awesomeness of digital to the offline world. So pretty cool guy. So check him out if you haven't already.
I like that. You
like that? Chad Sanderson, now at Microsoft, is the
I like that.
Is the experimentation platform manager at Microsoft. He's working with Azure EXP and trying to evangelize and explain the power of optimization to everybody. He's really, really good at that. And if you have stats questions, he's your guy because he can explain it in a way everybody can understand. Next up is Anthony. He is the Senior Engineering Manager at Walmart. He leads the A/B testing platform team that builds and maintains Expo, which is Walmart's experimentation engine. And last but not least, we have Jason McGovern, and he owns experimentation and the product at Vanguard. So thank you guys for joining us. I really, really appreciate your time. It sounds like, just so you know, Gary, I will pause after I ask you a question. We'll give you lots of time to answer because there seems to be a delay.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So let's get started. I want to start with server-side testing because that's how this entire topic became a conversation point that we decided to have a TLC call about. We have lots of TLC members who are looking at the options between client-side and server-side testing, and they really would like to better understand the pros, cons, considerations. Why would they lean one way or the other? So, Jason, since you're currently using a server-side solution, would you mind giving us kind of an upfront, introduction to server-side testing?
Yeah, so hello. Basically, we use a tool, SiteSpec. I think I'm allowed to say that. And
Absolutely.
basically, it serves as an intermediary between the client and the server. So we can either intercept the request coming from a client and modify it before it hits the server, or we can intercept it coming off the server, modify not just an HTML page, but a JSON feed or anything, and tweak it, do whatever we want to before it reaches the client. We use that for a lot of different scenarios for our journey labs, so to speak. It depends. We've done everything from simple changes to complete redesigned flows where we're testing it out and using our platform to kind of send people to different variations. So, for example, we've used it for like search algorithms,
right?
testing different search algorithms, for example. Using that kind of data, as a client might be typing ahead for help, we can, we're in the process of this. I don't want to say it's done or anything, but the plan is to use artificial intelligence to serve up the best kind of auto suggestions based on the client segment that they might fit into, for example.
Right.
And then if our auto suggestions, for example, they wouldn't select one, they can always submit their own question, and then we can take that and be better informed. Hey, people are entering this stuff, we're capturing that and then using that to our advantage and their advantage later so that we can better serve their needs.
Absolutely.
And I just feel like with some of the client side tools out there, I don't know that we would necessarily be able to do that.
So let's dumb it down just for a second for those that may not have the same background, and can you explain to them the difference between server and client and what you're referring to?
Yeah, so basically the client is someone sitting at home or on their smartphone or whatever, and whenever they type in Vanguard.com, they want to make a trade or they want to just, they're a prospect looking for something, that request is going to get sent from their machine to the Vanguard servers. And on its way, our platform sits in between and can either intercept it, redirect it. For example, if we know that they're a client and they fit a certain mold, we could send them to a different place on our server, which would send back a completely different experience. Like, for example, a prospect might see something completely different on a homepage than a client, or a client who has signed up for our advice program might see, different kind of features up front that would be suited to them. And it's kind of, a lot of it we're handling on the back end, if you know what I mean. It's not just like where the page isn't loading and then we're just necessarily modifying it. We're doing a lot of the stuff on the server side before it even gets to the pages. And even with the redirects, we're not loading a page and then sending it somewhere else. It all happens in sync. There's virtually no delay, and it's just a better experience from what we've seen, performance-wise.
That makes sense. And have you guys tried any of the client-side solutions, or has it been predominantly server-side?
It's predominantly server-side. We did evaluate a lot of different solutions, and whenever we gave the different vendors hey, this is what we're trying to do, the server-side solution was the only one that could do everything that we needed. So
fair. And just for everybody who's not over on the TLC calls, thanks Corey for posting that. Corey Underwood just posted a link to a good discussion on server and client-side testing that took place over on the Measure Slack, and then they posted the notes to the wiki. So the Measure wiki has notes on server-side versus client-side testing. So I encourage everybody to go there, check it out, and then give us your thoughts. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about testing outside of the website or a mobile app. I know, Jason, you guys have done stuff with Vanguard in the call center level. Obviously, Chad, I know you've done stuff at when you were back at Subway with kiosk testing. And Gary, are you guys doing anything today? Are you starting into any kind of retail testing?
Yeah, almost all of our clients, if they're using this software, darn it, they're testing. I mean, there's really not much point having running tests. All the tests that we're seeing are real world. They have to take place inside the store, and they range from things around kiosk and positioning to some really interesting operational testing about different staffing and labor strategies when you interact with customers. And then just, the kind of testing you might expect layout. So, if I try different signage strategies in a section, how does that impact what people are doing? So, sort of there's stuff all the way down to sort of the nuts and bolts of merchandising, up to some, I think, really interesting things that are more operational about, if we use different strategy working the line, management actually play out for people.
Awesome. Chad, can you give us some examples of some of the stuff that we talked about in the past that you've done with like the kiosk testing and how you measured it?
Yeah. So when I was at Subway and Sephora and to a degree Microsoft as well, one of the kind of fundamental core beliefs that our team tried to propagate is that if you have the ability to create a control and you have a metric that you can evaluate and collect data on and store that data somewhere, then really you should be running an experiment for any change that you want to make. So Kelly, you and Gary both mentioned kiosk. We've done a lot of kiosk testing at Subway. There's a lot of new features where Subway is designing the store of the future, and the store is being redesigned. Some of the technology within the store is being redesigned. The actual sort of look and feel of those stores is being redesigned. And executives and management always had a question of, we're investing a lot of money into some of the technology going into these stores, like digital signage, for example. But there's no reason to invest in digital signage, which is way more expensive than the traditional signage you can just print out from a computer, if it's not driving some marginal increase or it's not helping people make decisions faster. There's got to be some.
You have to maintain it and get it set up and keep it updated.
That's right. There has to be some metric that actually gets improved. So that was a big part of the strategy at Subway, was thinking, really the most difficult thing was coming up with the metrics. What is actually going to be the thing that we measure that is indicative of this particular piece of technology resulting in a better experience for people? A really good example of that is on kiosk. One of the most interesting learnings is that before our team really started working in this area, kiosk was actually being considered as potentially a loser, right? There's a good chance, hey, people say maybe we shouldn't implement kiosk because when we're looking at the average amount of revenue that's being spent on every kiosk order, it seems to be lower than the average value that's being spent at the front counter still. And that really wasn't the right way of looking at things, because introducing a kiosk into that environment changed people's fundamental behavior. So instead of the same segment of the population having one method of ordering, now you have two distinct segments of the population that are making very specific choices. You have the people using the front counter and the people that aren't. So we had to understand why a person would make that choice. So for example,
you basically took one population and due to self-selection created two separate populations. So it became an apples to oranges comparison.
That's right. So in order to actually to understand if there's some marginal improvement, you can't just look at the impact, the aggregated impact. You have to look at the impact among the different segments that are now using your different technologies in potentially different ratios. So families might be using the front counter much more, but maybe single people are using the kiosk much more, and you have to find a way to link those together.
Kelly, one of the things I wanted to add to that, some of the kiosk testing I think is fascinating, and I've been really surprised. Most of you guys are silent. Nobody is measuring what's happening with the interactive experience. And then on top of that, what we found is that there's a lot of environmental aspects to kiosk placement. So what one store test we did, it's actually a case study in our core, which piece was. And I think, it's funny because companies invest a lot of money a lot of times into building these experiences, and then they don't actually invest much into seeing how well it works in the physical environment they put it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities both for better measurement internal to the kiosk or electronic signage, digital signage experience, and external in terms of how it's integrated to the environment.
So I have a feeling, because that you just said a bunch of really great stuff. However, we're having some audio troubles on our end. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you to pause your video, and in the hopes that it will focus all of your bandwidth to the audio. And I think that will work. And I heard you mention a case study that you guys do. Is it posted on the website?
All right, Kelly, I have paused the video. Is that better?
So far. we
right,
shall see.
We'll keep fingers crossed.
There's still a delay.
It's not on the website, actually. It's part of our standard deck. Okay. Can I call in, Kelly?
You can. Do you have the phone number?
What if I just dial in?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. I'll drop audio and I'll rejoin on that. Okay, I'll shut up for the meantime.
Okay. And when he comes back, we'll ask him, because if he has that case study, I think all of us would be interested in reading it. So let's switch over to Anthony, because I haven't had a chance to talk to you yet, Anthony. And I would really love to know, specifically in your case, you have a in-house tool that you guys have created. Can you explain to me why you needed to create a different tool in-house, why the available systems weren't meeting your needs? What was unique and different about those?
Yeah, that's a good question. That gets asked quite often, and sometimes I question that myself because I'm like, we're doing a lot of work here. I think one is one reason really is just the scale of the program that we want to run here, and to be able to support that and work with all the systems that we have in-house as well, that we building an in-house system just made a little more sense. There were a couple catalysts that helped push the creation of the in-house system. We were using third party before, and we're running into some problems with how that's integrated with some of the technologies we're coming up with. Especially at that time, we were converting our website to React, and on the mobile side, we're looking at React Native and things like that. And a lot of these isomorphic type of applications or rendering applications have problems with traditional platforms, at least at that time. I think a lot of the platforms have caught up and they're able to support it now. But that was one of the main catalysts that pushed us. The other one was just to be able to control the features and the different capabilities the platform has, especially in terms of the developer experience here, because it is a server-side platform. So getting that integration points with the in-house platforms that we have and how the developers interact with it and build the website and build the features that are being tested. It was useful to have an in-house platform that we could really customize and make it simpler for that integration to happen.
So unpack that a little bit, because I know that that is an issue with a lot of companies that move into the server-side testing solution. It has to do, at least in part. So I hear, the things I hear are risk and security, and then integrations. And you mentioned integrations. So how are integrations easier for you with a server-side solution?
So for us, just to make it a little longer story, when we were using the third-party platform, one of the problems we ran into, and this was a little process-oriented too, but one of the problems we ran into was that developers would develop their features, and then the testing would come up on top of that, right? So the process of the product development and the product lifecycle, that just A/B testing happened to come after the deployment and after the product is already decided, and then they said, oh, let's A/B test this. And sometimes that was done in a silo.
Basically testing for risk mitigation after you've already put all the time and money and energy into developing something new.
Yeah, and also because they made changes on top of what was actually developed, and it was kind of done in a little bit of a silo because you know, silos exist, I guess. But then developers will come in and QA will come in and go, this isn't what we released, what happened? And it was that kind of bad surprise element. So, you know, by building a platform where the developers are aware of what they're building and what's being tested, it helped mitigate that, and also to change the process so that the testing was defined at the time that the product was being defined. Then everyone was aware of that. So yeah, in terms of integration, we were able to integrate with, there's two main integrations that we have that we're really advocating. Was with a feature, basically a configuration management system that we have. So it's a lot like flagging. But by integrating with that, and that platform being what all the app developers are already used to using, then they just have to, they don't have to really make too many changes, right? They're already using this feature flagging system, and now the A/B testing is just running on behind that, really. And so they don't have to make any specific code changes to integrate with the system. The other piece that we had, which was really good for us, and I think it's kind of unique, at least in the way that we did it, is that we have a CMS system, which is what a lot of the people who generate the content for the site or for the mobile app use. And we're able to integrate with that directly so that we can do almost like client side. Like client side, the advantage that people always say is, well, you don't need a developer. It's WYSIWYG. Our CMS isn't WYSIWYG, but you know, you can see the previews and stuff, but you don't need a developer to make the changes and deploy it. And so by integrating with the CMS, we basically have the same capability, but on the server side. And that was really powerful for us.
That makes a ton of sense. Are you guys doing any offline testing?
No, at least not that I'm directly aware of.
Not as part of the platform that you manage?
No. Yeah. And we are looking into it. We're trying to get into the store more, but it's difficult. Yeah. I think I need to talk to Gary.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in fact, let's check. Gary, is that you? Are you back?
I am back.
Awesome. So it sounded like before you cut off that you mentioned that there was a case study that you guys had published.
Yeah, I published might be a exaggeration. It's just in our standard overview deck, but it was really based on a series of experiments moving a kiosk position in a store. And the idea was we wanted to understand when people engaged with the experience and how the experience integrated with the rest of the store. And so from that perspective, it turned out that it made a pretty big difference. It made a pretty big difference in how many people used it. It made a pretty big difference in when they used it. And it actually made a pretty big difference in how they used it and how successful the internal part of the experience was, which I thought was really interesting because it gets to the idea that, you know, on the one hand, you want to be optimizing inside that experience itself, right? That's often a fairly interesting UI with a lot going on, but just as important is how that experience interacts with the rest of the environment. And we kind of see that stuff ignored a lot of the time. I think both sides, a lot of times it's very disappointing how much testing people do inside an experience like that to improve it. But a lot of times they don't really do anything to see if they can improve its integration with the broader environment. There's definitely opportunities around that. It made, I don't know, I'm pulling off the top of my head, I have it in front of me, but I think it made like a 30 or 40% difference in usage depending on where we position it in the store. And it had a pretty dramatic impact on the way it was used inside as well. So I think that was super interesting.
Chad, this reminds me of the slide that you shared with me about the imperfection of data and the way that we try to control for all of the things we can't control for. This sounds like an interaction effect that maybe needs to be considered that we might not think about when we're talking about offline testing.
Yeah, sure. I think I think that's I think Gary brought up a great point. And from my experience, the data collection in the offline world is very, very difficult. It's easy to get some information. It's hard when you start thinking about deeper questions. So, for example, it might be very simple if you want to run a test based on credit card payments, right? Because all that goes through a POS system. You can even, if you have like some type of hashing mechanism, then you can see credit card users over time, but then you don't get cash, right? Then you just get an aggregate value. And cash might be really important. Maybe introducing some feature into that particular store, whatever that environment is, dramatically changes the way that people use cash, and you need a way of measuring that too. So there's all sorts of mechanisms. One thing I found that happened a lot at some of our offline environments is that what we realized very, very quickly that it wasn't actually enough to use the digital experimentation tools that we had used in the online landscape, because the amount of metrics that you need to observe have changed, right? In the online world, you can collect 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 different metrics around performance and latency and user engagement and retention and all these other different types of things. But in the offline world, you have other things, like how long is, if you're a restaurant, for example, or you're a commerce, you're working in the commerce space, the length of the line in that store probably matters a huge amount. And that's not something that you're going to be able to measure through a digital data. You just a single data point that you can pull from somewhere. You have to have some way of physically observing that and capturing it.
So that brings me back to you, Gary. Are you guys looking at, like, how are all those data points being captured when you're looking at the offline stuff? Are you evaluating things like the number of people in the store and the amount of time and the wait, you know, when you're looking at any kind of, you know, testing of your product displays and locations and all of that? Yeah,
absolutely. That's the goal, and it is hard. I mean, it's heaven knows we find it hard, and that's the whole point of our business. But I think a couple things I guess I'd highlight about, you know, that kind of experience. I think of one test we did with a retail bank where the idea was they wanted tellers to come out and work the line. So come out from behind the counter and actually engage with people in the line. And the basic script was that they wanted to engage people and ask them if they had the mobile app, explain how to use it if they had a problem that could be solved with the mobile app. And they rolled this out, and what we actually measured is, they rolled it out as part of a test, right? They wanted to see if this had a positive impact, and they measured a lot of different things. They measured voice of customer. They did exit surveys in branches that were doing this and branches that weren't. We did behavioral stuff, so we were measuring the length of lines. We measured how often associates actually came out and did it, and then we measured the impact on the overall line when it happened. And we also measured whether there was any noticeable impact on app downloads. In other words, were they actually encouraging people to go out and get the app? So, you know, a single test like that actually had at least 4 significantly different KPIs. And it worked well for some things, it didn't work well for others, but it took took a pretty robust measurement effort to test something like that. And I think one of the most interesting findings was that a significant percentage of the branches that were doing it just weren't compliant. They weren't doing it when they were supposed to. So, you know, when you get into real world testing, a lot of times you run across the kinds of things that you don't have to worry about from a digital perspective. But in that case, you know, there were a lot of branches where they just weren't doing it, even though they were supposed to. But that in and of itself was a really important learning around that. And it actually, another one that I just wanted to bring up that I think is really amusing and fun. I have no idea if it's going to work or not. It's actually something we're doing right now. But it's a restaurant, and what they're doing is they're trying to gamify. It's a station serving kind of concept where you get in a line, you go from station to station, very, very common kind of a thing. What they're actually doing is we're measuring how long it takes the crew to actually serve each station, and we've built a kind of dashboard comparing them to other locations. And the idea is to encourage them to do better, basically, by showing how they compare to other restaurants in the same area and across the shift, so that they can actually see, hey, we're first, we're the best, or we're third, or we're fourth. And that's just a flat out test to see if it actually makes people go faster. So I think that's another fascinating way to sort of take these concepts and actually use them, not just from an analytics perspective, but they're actually gamifying the process and seeing if that works.
That's pretty cool. Although part of me is like, do I always want them to go faster? I
I
mean,
know.
sometimes.
Who knows what's going to end up in your food, right?
Yeah, I'm just, like, it's okay. You could take your time.
Yeah. I guess again, that depends on how long the line is, which I think goes back to Chad's point in a way that, when you get into this stuff, there's a lot of complexity in terms of, what you actually want and what the experience might be. I liked the fact that, like in the banking one, that they actually did voice of customer along with it. A lot of times that isn't the case, but it's really interesting to see how the voice of customer plays out in situations like that.
Yeah, and often. Go ahead, Chad.
Sorry, Kelly. Just to add on to Gary's point again, because I think it's a great discussion to have whenever you're thinking about doing this type of experimentation. I've worked with some companies in the past who are really, really excited about starting to experiment offline, and then once they actually got into it, they realized, oh wow, wait a second, this is actually really different from the digital world where we have these data points that are all collected automatically. So another example is in the case of franchised business ownership, you run into another problem, right? Because if you want to conduct an experiment in a store, then you need to get approval from the person who actually owns that store. And you run into a case of survivorship bias where you might have the people who all say yes to a particular experiment, and then you see whatever the KPI is going up. It's going up because that person was in a good place to receive that experiment. Right? It's not something that necessarily, if you rolled it out to everybody, it would have a really great impact. Like maybe it's because that particular store is in a really trendy part of town with lots of young people, and young people are more willing to embrace digital technology, but 60% of your business may be in, non-trendy locations. This is something that happens a lot. Business size and scale is also another thing we run into. Something I saw pretty frequently is that you would really get oftentimes two sort of types of customers. You have one type of customer that was very large and they were already profitable and they were looking to make revenue gains. And then you'd have customers that are much, much smaller, or they're not doing nearly as well, and they see this as a way of potentially saving the business, which is, we see that in digital experimentation too, right? And so those could have like really massive, very, very large differences. You might see a non-improvement from a store that already isn't doing very well for themselves, but that doesn't mean that whatever feature you've implemented isn't a good choice. It just means that particular store is already failing, right? So yeah, like Gary said, lots of complications to do right. It's a big investment. The one other thing that I would add is, in terms of offline testing, there is the store, but offline testing is also something that can happen internally at the corporate level as well. So testing, really the concept of experimentation, at least if you're using statistics, is just using data in order to quantify the risk of any particular decision that you're making. And if you're making some decision, any decision at all that's going to have pretty wide-reaching, lasting consequences, then being able to quantify the risk around that decision, even if it's imperfect, is better than having no understanding of the risk at all. And oh, thanks for bringing that up, Kelly. So this is a slide that I presented at a conversion hotel in the Netherlands back in November of last year. But really, all of these different areas have a pretty large financial risk that are associated with them. Could be hiring somebody to a team, could be your executive leadership, you're buying brand new tools, that you're like new productivity tools and things like that. Evaluating a vendor is a big one if you're working with an agency. Making a sales pitch to a customer, right? Every single one of these areas has risk, and if there's risk associated, and it's an action that you repeat over and over and over again, then you can run an experiment. And these are things that we've actually done to varying degrees of success, depending on the amount of data we have and how well thought out that test actually is.
Which comes back to, I think, maybe now all four of you have referenced the fact that you need a strong measurement plan with the right KPIs for whatever type of testing you're doing, whether it's on-site or off. The bulk of the analysis work has to happen in the beginning, because if it doesn't happen before you've designed it and launched the test, you actually can't measure it effectively. But I'm curious, how often do you guys find that, assuming the data is available, let's say we didn't think about looking, for example, Gary, at the location of the kiosk, or the length of the line, or the cash versus credit card, or whatever the things were that we didn't think were a problem. In the digital world, we're going to be able to measure them anyway most of the time, obviously not always. But in the offline world, let's assume you can get the data. How often do you guys find yourself going after stuff that wasn't part of the original measurement plan? And is that a step towards analysis paralysis, or is it necessary just because of the complexity inherent in that type of testing?
I guess I would say we often want more data than we have, and we usually end up not having it. I mean, it's rare that you get an opportunity to go after data unless you have a relatively straightforward path to it. I will say, and I just wanted to touch on one of those previous points, I think, even in the digital world, I think that the impact of localization is probably underrated. And a lot of times people will run tests and then scale them out internationally without necessarily checking to see how different it is. And I think I've always been a big believer, as you know, Kelly, in segmented testing. And really, I think there's a lot of opportunities to go more hyper-local, even in the digital world, around testing. And I think that's something that, certainly, hey, working in this store world, it's friggin' local to an extraordinary degree, and it really hammers this point home. But I do kind of suspect, and I've always kind of believed, that the digital world is more local than people give it credit for, and probably don't take as much advantage of that testing as we ought to.
Hey, Kelly, I would add one of the things, even though Vanguard isn't, we're not out in the real world with kiosks or anything, but even though we're strictly digital, one of the things we struggle with is connecting the dots. For example, it costs us money every time somebody emails us or calls us. Actually, it costs us more money to answer an email because it has to go through legal. So some of the tests that we do are to help people self-provision, figure it out on their own. And in lieu of that train of thought, we have kind of helped them to try to self-provision rather than just searching for the first phone number they can find. So we try to figure out what it is that might be impeding them from achieving their goal and then help them. But in doing so, we're also maybe inadvertently making it more difficult to just call us. And one of the KPIs that often goes along with this is how many, compared to control, for example, how many phone calls did we reduce it by?
Right.
And so just imagine a phone call costs us $20. So we saved 100 phone calls compared to control today, just making that up. Great. So, all right, we saved, $100 or $20 on a call, but maybe that person was going to roll over or transfer money from our competitor, $100,000, $10,000, who knows? We don't know. Because maybe they got so frustrated, they just decided, you know what? I can't figure out how to do this. I can't find out how to contact them. I don't have the time to do it. I'm just going to go to the competitor, call them, they're going to get my money. How do we know, that person, like for the people
value
that,
of the calls deflected, the cost.
right, like for the people that actually go through with the self-provisioning and complete it, we can quantify that. But for the people that just give up and go somewhere else, we have no idea what that could or would have been. And so even in the digital world, we still struggle to kind of wrap our hands around like everything that could be, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's actually a major it's a major problem that we see all the time with other organizations within internal to Microsoft, where there are many data pipeline issues that oftentimes some of these internal groups don't really care to think about until they get to the point where they need to run an experiment. It's just acceptable to analyze things with metrics where the instrumentation maybe is broken, or people didn't really pay that too much attention into what the telemetry actually means. So a common use case internal to Microsoft in terms of running experiments is to define a metric in two different ways, run the experiment, and then see how that metric actually changes depending on how it's defined. That way you can say, I either feel that this is more or less accurate, and you can modify that over time. Another thing that we find, to add on to Jason's point, is that there's a lot of situations where, not only in the online world, I would say especially in the online world, where you can make a bad decision on good data. You can think that you're doing the right thing, but in reality, because there's some missing piece of your data pipeline, then you actually do something incorrectly. So for example, you might, maybe you write some really great marketing language on your homepage, and you convince a whole bunch of people to buy your product. And because you're measuring conversion rate or average number of orders or something like that, then your KPIs go up and you say, well, this is great. But what you're not measuring is the number of returns, right? Is because that's an offline product and it's difficult to track that. So maybe your returns also spike, and this is actually a net negative. And what you don't take into account is what's happening in the branding world. So you have so many people that are returning and saying, hey, this product is bad, that you're actually losing long-term visitors, and it's costing you over time. So maybe you win in the short term, but over time you actually lose. So being able to connect those strands together is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Chad, because we sometimes talk about leading indicators versus the lagging. Like, it seems like we fall into the trap of always measuring lagging indicators. But I would say, like, hey, just because this experiment maybe resulted in more people doing whatever it is you want them to do right now, maybe the lifetime value, like maybe there's leading indicators that indicate, in the long term, this is not a really good idea. Depends which game you're playing.
Yeah, I have an example of a store long gone. How many of you remember, fondly or otherwise, Circuit City stores? A little bit, yeah. So I worked for Circuit City before they went out of business. And this story is not the reason they went out of business, but it's kind of close. Back when rear projection, remember the giant TVs that took up a lot of space? They were like all the rage. And we did an analysis and we said, hey, that's where your margin is. And all these appliances that you're selling are really low margin. So we recommend getting rid of the appliances and replacing them with more TVs. It was solid business advice. Left out the fact, because it was siloed information, that the appliances had a 95% attachment rate to a pure margin insurance. So you get rid of all of those appliances and replace them with these giant TVs, which, by the way, the very next year we went to flat screens and you didn't need the space anymore. And the company has giant empty stores with the TVs all over the walls. And then, thank you, Walmart, the price of TVs, goes way down and the margins go away. And now you have a whole bunch of empty stores that you got to fill, and they filled it with a bunch of junk. And the junk that they filled it with didn't sell. And so then they had high owned inventory. And then when the market crashed, So it's kind of the reason they went out of business, but it all came back to siloed data and making decisions that didn't include all the data and all the KPIs. Like we didn't evaluate everything right. And we tested it, by the way. We did geographical testing at different stores. So we took this store and we took the appliances out, and we took these other stores that were sister stores, and we left the appliances in, and we measured the impact on sales and margin. And wow, it was huge. But we didn't look at insurance, and that was big. So it's real important to think about all the elements.
That's really interesting. I have a question, since I'm not involved in like the physical space,
Yeah.
for Gary or Chad. When it comes to kiosk testing, how do you account for seasonality? You know, like I assume you must have the kiosk here this week, or maybe this next 2 weeks, or whatever it might be. Then like maybe there's something different happening in the world that would affect it. Like, how do you normalize that or approach that? Or how often do you move them around and compare?
Well, one of the big challenges in physical testing is you can't do real A/B tests, right? I mean, there is no perfect test where you're just able to, at the same time, in exactly the same physical space, test two different things. So most of the testing that we see our clients doing involves a set of hero and set of control stores that have been they call them sister stores, and the idea is they've been matched because they're similar in layout, similar in point of sale, and similar in traffic makeup. And what they'll do is they'll hold it constant in one set of stores and move it in the other set of stores, and then test relative to those two things. It's kind of a cumbersome process. We also do see a lot of stores just do sort of time sequence testing. Okay, we put it here, then we put it here, then we put it here, and they'll do those kinds of tests. That's never ideal because every store does have pretty strong seasonal patterns. But, you know, you do what you can, I guess, with these kinds of things. I think if we're in a time sequence test environment, what we'll try to do is balance out and try to control the segments of you know, we know how the rest of the traffic shifted. We know if more people came in and looked at X or Y. We'll try to control for those factors. It's definitely a lot harder to get a classic A/B test. And a lot of times, hey, as analysts, you're doing the best you can. You're holding as much constant as you can and hoping to get it close to right.
Yeah, just to add to that seasonality, I mean, we had a story here where this was before we had a lot of A/B testing, but they released a feature once, and like, you know, the GMV or the conversion rate went way up, and everyone's like, oh, this is the best feature ever. Yeah. And then they look back at it and go, oh, wait, it was like around Mother's Day, so people are just buying more of this thing because it's Mother's Day. And so, you know, A/B testing, at least digital, you run into those problems too, because even though you can do, you're not necessarily trying to do time series type of testing, you know, before and after, but even in a given season.
Sure, a particular offer may look like a big win, but maybe it was only a win because of the timing that you shared it, because it was near back to school or Mother's Day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I guess along those lines, and this is maybe mostly for Chad or Gary or Anthony, whoever. So if we at Vanguard, we experience spikes at the end of months, at the end of quarters, end of years, and obviously tax season because we're an investment company. How would we like go about, like, say, hey, we ran a test for 4 weeks in November, and because the way we look at it is we're trying to test and learn culture. We're trying to say, hey, we're pretty confident that if we run this going forward, we will see the same kind of result. But it's like, how do you, I guess, map that out to other seasons? I mean, or do you just have to, I guess, run your test? I don't even know how to explain what I'm trying to say. Like, we run a test, we find the result in one part of the year, but it doesn't really account for the tax season or the end of a quarter where people are interested. So how do you confidently say, yeah, that we're pretty sure this would hold true going forward, even in other seasons? Or do you suggest like rerunning the test in different seasons, or what would be the approach?
Hey, Chad, I want to call on you and maybe give you an opportunity to explain trustworthiness.
Yeah. So that's thanks, Kelly. Trustworthiness is kind of a big concept at Microsoft. Jason, exactly what you're describing was the problem that Bing faced about a decade ago, where they were running experiments. The issue they had was you run a test, you get some results, and then after you implement it and report to your executives that you're going to make X amount a year extrapolated based on whatever this number is, you check back 4 or 5 months later and the result is gone. So that's kind of what our internal platform is designed to resolve, or at least mitigate. So like just to talk a little bit about kind of EXP, because it does do some really interesting things. There's all sort of statistical methods that it uses. It uses things like variance reduction, which greatly increases the power of the test. Basically, it looks at, this is what the fluctuation of your metric looked like at all other points during the year, and this is what it looked like during your test. So you can subtract out some of that fluctuation and just look at the raw difference. Now, whether that was due to seasonality is another question, and that answer really purely kind of comes down to business cycles, right? So if you have one thing I think most people have heard is that when you're running an experiment, especially a digital experiment, you want to run it for full business cycles. And a full business cycle is really going to be different for every business. There are some businesses out there who have a business cycle of 6 months because people use the products significantly differently at the beginning of the year than they do in the middle of the year. So that's not to say that necessarily you need to let a test run for 6 months, but if that's your business cycle, it might be wise to at least rerun the test at multiple points during the year. That's something that we recommend our internal customers do a lot at Microsoft. Usually if you run a test and you get a winner, the sort of de facto recommendation is to run it again. Because if you see that win reappear, then you can be pretty confident that something's going on, right?
So you're using like the pure scientific study methodology of, oh my gosh, what's it called? The
repeatability.
Thank you, repeatability. I had the first part of the word.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And one thing I find very, very interesting is that in the digital world, replication is way easier than it is in academia, right? Because in academia, there's a massive cost. Then you have to think about all the external factors that influence your experiment the first time. Whereas in the digital world, literally all you have to do is go back to that test and turn it on again, right? It's a push of the button. I mean, obviously not always that simple, but it's very, very easy. And few companies actually do this on a regular basis. So it's important. It's something that should be done. And sometimes if you have a long business cycle at your business, you just sort of need to get into the process of, before you say this experiment is a winner, I need to replicate it in, every quarter of the year or something like that, right?
Yep. We are down to 3 minutes remaining. I want to give folks on the TLC Slack or the Zoom chat an opportunity. If you have any last questions you want to ask of this group, now's your chance. I also want to remind everybody that I need folks that can talk about SEO and CRO. I need new topic ideas. And can I give them a sneak peek, Chad? You're on mute.
Oh, a sneak peek. Well, I think for this conversation, I'll say that we have a kind of a new offering at Microsoft. It's still in really early phases. Me and Kelly have been talking about it for a while. All I'll kind of say in this forum is that Microsoft's internal experimentation tool is going to be going public at some point. So we are soliciting a few beta customers, like 3 or 4 right now, just to test things out. So if you're interested, feel free to give me a ring and we can have a conversation. But other than that, that's all I'll say.
That's fair. And just so you know, that's not what I meant.
Oh, is it?
I wouldn't have put you on the spot like that. No, I was talking about the fact that you're going to come back in March or April to share your testing 101 deck as a
Okay, great. That was good then. Yes. Also that.
So also that Chad's coming back, guys, and he's got a great deck to share. All right. Any last minute? Okay. So we have something could be difficult in repeating a test if the underlying platform has changed between test executions. That is actually a really common thing that I see, Chad. How do you guys control for that when the underlying, for example, the changes have happened to the website? Maybe you ran this test, you ran some other tests simultaneously on other areas, different changes have happened. And now when you rerun the test, you have to look at the potential, like, first of all, there's dev work that has to be done to rework it. But then isn't there also some concern about the validity of the results if you have, completely different foundations for your control?
Well, in theory, what should be happening is that any additional changes that are made are compounding on top of the improvement that you already saw, right? So they're all building on top of each other. So if you go back and you then remove whatever the experience is that caused the 2% lift, then you should still see some negative lift. Of course, if you have a whole bunch of people that are not testing things and they're changing all types of things in the back end, and you're testing and you're changing your UX framework and you're changing all sort of front end stuff, and you're not testing that, then that's a problem.
Then that's a problem. And I'd like to think that everybody's testing everything before they push it live, but I think we know that's not always the case for most companies. So yeah, risks, right? Which we're trying to mitigate with testing. So thanks, panel. I really appreciate it. I know it wasn't super easy for you, Gary, to make it work. Thanks for figuring out the technology. Really appreciate it. Jason, Chad, Anthony, all of you, always can't wait to have you back. Talk to everybody next month, and thanks. Don't forget to order your stickers and check out the YouTube channel.